get these worked out together. Be multitasking with these two things. Okay, when I first started working at Secret World, I realised that there were large numbers of badger cubs coming into the rescue centre. And this caused me some problems because I was ultimately responsible for finding the release sites for these badgers. And in any one year we could have anything between 20 or 40 badger cubs that would all require releasing after long-term rehabilitation, which, if any of you got involved in this sort of work, that's a huge number of badgers to find release sites for. So I started looking at the circumstances, how badgers come into a rescue centre, and I concluded that perhaps not all of these badgers coming into a rescue centre actually needed to come in the first place, or perhaps some of the cubs that had come in could be returned after a short period of rehabilitation. Having said that, to try and put that into some form of working progress to actually go out and do that are two different things. So in 2011 I started some research looking at returning cubs to the natal set, and this presentation today is just a snapshot of that research, and also to highlight that Lancashire Badger Group had produced a handbook detailing this research, which hopefully will be a benefit to badger workers, badger groups and rehabilitators. Wait, that works. Very early on I noticed there were three issues associated with this research, and the first one was that there was very little information, very little data out there which would actually allow us to undertake this research. So I approached all the badger groups in England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, and then during the 2011 conference, which I think was in Sheffield, I left a flyer on all the seats in the room asking if anybody had any information, because I was very keen to get people's experiences of this. Some people did come through with information, but not a huge amount, which didn't really surprise me, because that really leads on to point number 2, and that is, how do people actually gain experience? I would say that badger groups are what I would call primary feeders of rescue centres. In other words, they get by far the most badger cubs, but in isolation they only perhaps see 1 or 2 cubs a year, if that, apart from perhaps some of the big groups like Somerset or Cornwall. But all these badger cubs feed into rescue centres, and by the end of the season, what might seem as just 1 or 2 badger cubs to a badger group will be a huge number at whether it's Secret World or the RSPCA, so it becomes a problem. So the next issue was the human element, and this is by far the most complex and difficult question to overcome. And I really hope I don't offend anybody here today, but I do feel that there is a tendency when we're dealing with wildlife to put human values and humans' emotions into dealing with that wildlife. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have empathy, but we have to understand that animals are wild, and we have to respect the environment they've come from and try and deal with them in a way that isn't going to, perhaps at the end of the day, make things worse for them. I identified a number of what I call common barriers, and these are things which I'm going to deal with in the next couple of slides. But these are the reasons perhaps people will say, well, we can't put a cub back because it's abandoned or it's lost, and hopefully we'll be able to address those a little bit later on. And then also people are very reluctant to listen to sound badger ecology. We know a lot about badgers, the way they work in the environment, and we still have situations today, for example, where people will want to take a badger that's coming, an adult badger for example, and because they don't like the environment in which it's being found, it might have been found in an urban area, an area that perhaps they wouldn't want to live in, they're reluctant to release that adult badger back there once it's had treatment, which is completely the wrong thing. If it's come from that area, it has to go back to that area. So let's be really clear, the research was not about abandoning cubs. The research was about setting up very sound and strong protocols that would allow us to release cubs and manage and monitor what was going on. We were really keen to do that. And one of the things that we used was this remote release cage. It's a very simple piece of kit that we devised. And this allowed us to put a cub into that cage. We could take it to a location and we could then observe the behaviour of that cub. And if we felt that it was inappropriate, we could open it remotely and thereby not break any connectivity between perhaps the cub and the sow. We also used RFID. We would microchip the cubs wherever possible. And this would then allow us to go along afterwards and use the RFID to log that microchip. And this would then tell us whether that cub was actually still at the set where we released it or not. The research was centred on short-term rehabilitation. Most of you will be aware of long-term, where cubs go in for a long period, but this was about short-term rehabilitation, or in fact not even bringing the cub into the rescue centre in the first place. The research was based over a 4-year period, and we do have 6 years of data now. And in that 4-year period, we supported or prevented 50 cubs from coming into the rescue centre. And that was also networking with a number of groups around the country. We realised very early on that the age of the cub was critical in how we dealt with that cub. If you have a cub that is pre-weaned and immobile, then how you approach that cub and try and release that cub back to the nasal set is completely different than if you've got, say, a cub that is weaned. When you have a cub that is dependent on a sow, then we have to make sure that there's a sow at the set and prepared to engage with that cub. And if we couldn't establish that, then the cub wasn't released. We're also very keen to look at the period in which a cub could stay in a rehabilitation centre and then successfully release back into the wild. And again, we linked in to the age of the cub, and I'll deal with that a little bit later on in the presentation. So let's look at the human element. This is the element which is by far the most difficult one to overcome. We identified 7 key areas which we felt needed addressing. And these are concerns that people would come forward with, and these were legitimate concerns, but they were also a double-edged sword because people would often use them to prevent a release from going ahead. So the first one, and they're in no particular order or importance, but we'll just go through them. So the cub may be in the wrong territory. Well, quite clearly, if we can establish the cub is in the wrong territory, then we can't release it. Badger is very territorial. But how do you establish that? And one of the things that we do is, and we identified are certain behaviour traits when it comes to badger cubs. So we would put a cub in a cage, the cage I mentioned earlier, and we could observe the cub in that cage. We could also observe the reactions of the adult badgers at the set. And if we got a positive reaction, so in other words, the cub was very excited, it was whickering, it was clawing, keen to get out of the cage, then invariably when you released it, it would head straight in the direction of the set, even though the set wasn't perhaps in the direct line of view. It knew where it was, you could clearly see that. With the cubs that remained quiet or indifferent to their surroundings, generally those cubs weren't released because we felt we're in the wrong environment. And often if we did a trial and we released those cubs from the cage and we had a mechanism to recapture them, which normally meant fast legs and a long net, you could observe that cub, and invariably those cubs would be very indifferent to their surroundings, not at all engaged, and those cubs were brought back in and they would go into long-term rehab. The picture of the badger here, Camo Kev as we called him, this was an interesting case because Kevin came in with a sibling, and both of them had been found above ground during the day, about 100 metres from the set. They'd come down a steep embankment. We thought that's where they'd come from. But unfortunately Kevin had a broken leg. He'd been kicked by a horse. But the sibling was, apart from being dehydrated, was treated at Secret World, and then we took him back to the set. We put him down in a cage very similar to this cage here, and we observed his behaviour. And he exhibited excited behaviour, very keen to exit the cage. And we were also able to observe an adult at the set, and this adult came out, it approached the cub, it engaged with the cub, nose-to-nose contact, and when we remotely released the cage, both the cub and sow went across the set complex and into a hole nearby. So really what I'm trying to say here as well is that we had a different approach. Even though those cubs came in together, they didn't stay together, we split them up. So sometimes people say, well, a cub has been handled, it'll have human scent on it, therefore if we try and release it, it'll be rejected by the sow. All the evidence that we have got shows that that is not the case. The two examples here, the one on the left-hand side, wells, these two cubs were unearthed during the removal of a manure heap. Both those cubs were handled extensively by the landowner and by the contractor. We were able to put those cubs back in a hedgerow, and during daylight hours the sow came back and picked up and removed both those cubs and took them to safety. And the picture on the right hand side, the Draycott one, this was an interesting one. This cub was about 4 weeks old. It was found outside the entrance to a set in a farmyard, and the people on the farm were very badger friendly. And we have no idea as to how this cub came out of the set. It couldn't have crawled out, it wasn't physically capable of doing that, but it was there at the set entrance. And we placed the cub at the set entrance as dusk fell, and unfortunately the cub was quite active, it was quite fluid, and it ended up rolling down the set entrance. And we were able to monitor this with the camera, we could watch what was going on. This quite clearly was something that we didn't want to happen, because we hadn't established whether the sow was alive and wanted to engage with that cub. So I had to make a split-second decision, and I jumped out of the car in which I was watching the cub from, had to reach down into the set, leaving my scent all over the set entrance, all over the cub. And I'm sure any of you who've been badger watching will know, if you leave your set on or near a set and then expect to see some badgers, then that isn't going to happen. But in this instance, we put the cub back at the set entrance. I put a piece of wood in front which stopped the cub from rolling back down into the set again. And within about 5-7 minutes, the cub was cackling quite profusely, and this adult badger here appeared, leaned over the wood, picked the cub up in its mouth and took it back down in the set complex. Now I cannot be sure that was the sow, but I would put money on it that it was the sow, because only a sow with that bond with a cub would overcome that fear of the human scent on the set and on the cub. So this is a case that some of you will be aware of, where a set gets completely destroyed. And we're back here on the one on the left hand side, the Wells one. If you can see here, this whole area contained a manure heap at one time, and it was completely removed. There was nothing left at all. And when we attended the site, Vanessa, who took the call, asked the people to keep the cubs warm and safe, which they did do. And we were able to put the cubs in the hedgerow. I was able to establish that there was a number of natural sets nearby in some hedgerows with good connectivity with these hedges. We placed them there, and one cub was retrieved by the sow in 4.5 hours after the set had been destroyed, and the other was taken at 6.5 hours. And the picture on the right hand side, which was taken in the sewage works, there was a porter cabin placed on that set. When they demolished the building with the excavator that's at the back of the picture, they found basically a nest containing moss and twigs, and in that contained 3 badger cubs. We kept the cubs warm and safe. In fact, that's why it's got a high-vis jacket on it. And I felt reasonably confident that if we could keep these cubs safe, that the sow would return. What we did do in this case, and the case of the whales, is we checked the cubs out for their condition, that they hadn't been injured during the process of the earth moving or the demolition. And sure enough, as dusk fell when it came to the sewage work sites, the sow did appear. She was extremely nervous. In fact, I've never observed a badger, an adult badger, be so nervous yet stay in an environment. Normally if they're nervous, they'll disperse. But it was pacing around this broken area, and eventually she built up the courage. She came in, she picked up the cub and took it back and took it to a set which was on site, which we also knew about. Unfortunately, the sow didn't return and take the other two cubs, so those two cubs went into Secret World. And although rescue centres do the very, very best they can, they are constrained by a number of things, and one of them is the release sites. There are very few release sites available. But the other thing is TB testing. And this is a problem, because although cubs go positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got TB. And in the case of these two cubs, one of them went positive and the other one didn't do. And when the cub was taken for post-mortem and culture, it came back as a negative. So we have to always bear that in mind. If we can keep a cub in the wild, that's the very best thing we can possibly do. But it just depends on the circumstances. The site is dangerous or unsafe, and this is a very interesting site. This was in 2012, I think it was. We had extensive flooding in the southwest, and in fact this picks up on Steve's presentation before about the weather causing problems for wildlife. That caused huge flooding in Somerset. We were called out to this, and in fact 2 cubs were found in a stable block. We presume that the sow had put the cubs into this stable block. We surveyed the site and we found nearby, about 25 metres away, a flooded set entrance. We did our investigation work and we found adult prints and cub paw prints in the mud around the set entrance. The cubs remained safe. We primed them with food and water and warmth, but we wanted to establish that the sow was still alive. She could be dead for all we knew. So we placed the cubs in this stable. We closed the door and we set the camera to monitor it. And that night, this sow appears. We know it's a sow. We can see the feeding ring here, clearly exposed. She's recently been feeding cubs, and she was very frantic to get to those cubs. So the cubs were safe, but we also established that the sow was prepared to engage with the cubs. So the following night, and this is where Mike might find this interesting, because the One Show were waiting on my phone call the next morning, and the cubs were still there. They were going to come and do a piece on that, covering all the flooding in Somerset. I was quite nervous about that. Don't like doing these sorts of things. And I was very pleased when I looked at the camera the following morning and I saw the sow had climbed over this board. We put the board there to prevent the cubs from wandering off, but it would allow the sow to climb in and attend to the cubs. In fact, she did do, and during the night she took both of the cubs to a place of safety, another set nearby, and I fortunately didn't then have to do any interviews with the One Show. So we continued to monitor the set that had been flooded out, and we'd microchipped the cubs at this stage, and we were able then to observe a level of activity increasing as the water subsided on that original set. And we were able to confirm around 3 weeks after the cubs had been returned to the mum that both these cubs, in fact here on the picture, were the cubs that we actually returned. Right. So the cub is abandoned or orphaned, and people often use this term, and I feel that can often be a barrier to a release going ahead unless we've really been able to establish if that is the case. And this example here was by Derek Barry in Essex. He got called out to an adult badger that had been found dead at the side of the road. And when he investigated, he realised it was a lactating sow. So he obviously had to find where the cubs were to this badger. And he did a good bit of detective work, because he was able to observe that underneath the cub the adult, it had a light brown colouring of mud, and that wasn't in relation to the accident where it had been hit by a car. And he asked a local person, did he recognise where that particular colour soil came from? And the chap said, yeah, there's a badger set over the other field and it's got mounds and it's the same colour soil. And he went to investigate, and literally as he turned up at the set, there's a badger cub literally poking its head out looking for mum. Derek placed the camera there, and in fact a number of cameras, and was able to monitor. In fact, it turned out there were 3 cubs at this set. These cubs were on the cusp of being weaned. We couldn't capture them at this stage, even if we wanted to, because they were really wild. So we decided that we would provide the suitable sort of food at the set to keep those cubs going, which is exactly what he did. He did that over a number of days. He got more evidence with the cameras. And our reason behind this was the fact that we thought, if we can support feed the cubs at the set, and there was then a problem, it'd be a lot easier then to cage trap them, which is what we had as a backup. But we never got to that point. The cubs did really well. But what was also interesting is that during that whole period, right up until the autumn, because that's how long the support feeding went on, no adult badgers were seen at that set. So this must have been an outlying set. So some people might say, well, there's no adult there, you can just bring those cubs into a rescue centre. But if you think about the logic of this, if you've got a cub or cubs in a rescue centre, they will often be together as a unit, and those cubs will not have the benefit of having an adult with them. In fact, they're at a slight disadvantage because they're going to be not experiencing life skills like these 3 cubs were. So we decided to continue with the monitoring, continue with the support feeding, and like I say, these cubs went all the way through to the autumn, where the feeding was then reduced to a point where they were coping on their own in the wild. The cub is sick, injured, and needs to be admitted for treatment. Quite clearly, if a cub is sick or injured, then it does have to come in for treatment. No question about that. But that doesn't mean that we can't then consider a release. Once a cub comes into a rescue centre, one of the first questions we need to be asking is basically, is this cub viable to go back? If it's treated, can it go back? And if we can consider that this is a possibility, then people who are involved, such as the badger groups, need to be out there at that time doing all the investigation works, putting the cameras up, monitoring it, assessing what's going on, so that when the cub is fit and healthy, it can go straight back, or an attempt can be made to return the cub back to the wild. This was an interesting one. This cub here in Sidmouth came in, I think it was June or July this year. It was found on a golf course, or near a golf course, and it was suffering due to the dry weather, extensive drought at a particular time. That cub went into West Hatch, I think it was, and then about a week later another cub appeared, and we presumed that had come from the same set. It was found in the same area. So 2 cubs ended up at West Hatch. In this period of time, the Devon Badger Group and the Somerset Badger Group extensively surveyed the area, but they also put up trail cameras which allowed them to monitor the activity at the nearest set, and therefore they were able to build up a picture of what was going on there. The cubs were in rehab for about 17 days, and they were then taken to the site. Each cub was released individually because we wanted to observe the reactions of each cub. We didn't want one just to follow the other one into the set blindly. And each cub selected a different entrance, but both went easily into the set. What was interesting is on this particular site is that prior to us releasing those cubs, it had been extensively monitored and no cubs were noted at that set. Once the cubs had been released, those cubs stayed at that set, and in fact the support feeding or the monitoring has only just finished on that site, and I can report that both those cubs are still at the set now. So quite clearly we got the set right and we made the right decision for those 2 cubs. And then the last point is, how long can a cub be in rehabilitation and successfully returned? Well, the longest period that we had a cub in Secret World was 6 weeks, but that cub was, I think, around 12 to 14 weeks old. And I must say, I think that is probably at the far end of the scale. If you get a cub that comes in and it is perhaps a couple of days old or a couple of weeks old, then those cubs should really go back almost immediately. What we have to remember here is there won't be that same bond between the sow, and there won't be the same bond between that cub or cubs with the rest of the social group. Typically, cubs would be in Secret World for anything from 7 to 14 days, and then successively return back to the natal set. And we were able to confirm that this was definitely our cub when we released it after 6 weeks, because we used RFID, we set it up at the set, and we were able to confirm 14 days and then a follow-on 26 days later. That's definitely our cub there. So really just to finish off, what's really important here is long-term rehab is vital for badger cubs as a fallback. But I think it's really important that badger groups do as much as they possibly can when they're rescuing these cubs, and hopefully the handbook will allow people to be able to have a better idea, a better understanding of what they can and can't do. And if we can prevent more from coming into rescue centres, that has to be a good thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. I know this booklet is available, handbook as well, isn't it? We've got this here. People can get a copy of this at the conference as well. Lots of very important information there. You're obviously a fountain of knowledge and expertise. There's a few questions. We've got some time.